Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers, presented by FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education. So here, Anthony, on the first week of the football season, I'm going to ask you what's new and exciting, and it's going to be
Not
very,
football.
very boring, I'm sure. It's going to be not football. That's right. So, Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
It's been a month since President Trump signed an executive order allowing companies to defer the collection of payroll taxes. Yet it appears that almost no one is choosing to defer. Presidents don't have the authority to alter taxes. That power belongs to Congress. What Trump did with his executive order was to alter when people and businesses pay the payroll tax, not whether they pay it. Where the economics is concerned, that makes all the difference. Economists are constantly reminding us that people respond to incentives. When the government taxes a thing, be it gasoline, alcohol, imports, or even labor, it gives sellers less of an incentive to sell and buyers less of an incentive to buy. The result is that taxing a thing causes the economy to bring forth less of that thing, and reducing a tax on a thing causes the reverse. But deferring the payroll tax is very different from cutting the payroll tax. A tax deferral isn't even a temporary tax cut. A tax deferral is a tax cut in the present, followed by an equally large tax increase in the future. Because people know that today's tax cut will be matched with an equally hefty tax increase in the future, they pretty much do nothing. If they have no choice in the matter, they'll tend to put the tax windfall aside and just hand it back to the government later. As we're seeing today, if they're given a choice in the matter, they opt not to take the tax deferral at all, knowing that the only thing they stand to gain is more paperwork come tax time. Had President Trump consulted any principles-level economics text, he would have quickly figured out that his payroll tax deferral would have little effect. Or he could have consulted recent history. President Obama instituted cash for clunkers back in 2009. You might recall this was an attempt to stimulate the economy wherein the government would pay people $2,000 to trade in their old cars for new cars. Like Trump's payroll tax, Obama's cash for clunkers was a temporary arrangement, and people knew it was temporary. New car sales jumped up during the months that cash for clunkers was in operation, then dropped by almost the same amount in the subsequent months. Mostly what the program did was to cause people who were planning on buying a new car anyway to buy them sooner. The moral of the story is that when it comes to stimulating the economy, the most effective tax cuts are permanent tax cuts.
I think the moral of the story is that you should have talked about football.
I have nothing interesting to say about football. In fact, forget about interesting. I have nothing to say about football.
It comes out you don't have a lot of interesting things to say about economics either, but that never stops you. Crying out loud. Well, I want to think about our friends in India, specifically the people in the city of Mumbai. There's a very interesting thing that's going on there. And you might know this, you might not, but Mumbai has this terrible din of noise from all the cars driving everywhere all the time. And it's become kind of legendary. It's so terrible. Come to find out, they hate it exactly as much as you might think they hate it, because they've implemented an ingenious plan to cut down on the noise pollution. They hooked up at 10 very significant intersections that have traffic lights. They hooked up a gubbins on top of the light that measures the level of the sound. And if the people waiting in line for the light to change lean on their horns too much, they have to wait longer.
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
It's ingenious, and it's more ingenious than you might think, because over much of India, there's a countdown on when the light is going to turn green.
Right.
And they see the countdown having seconds added to it when they get over 85 decibels, which is a fair bit of noise.
Now, you know the smart thing to do here. The people who are going through on the green light should lay on their horn as they're going through to reset the clock so the guys behind them also have the green light.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the correct answer over the long term, but this is a real ingenious solution
that
to
really
a
is
problem.
Yeah.
And, I like seeing this kind of thing. I'm reminded of when Washington, D.C. went the other way on this and started giving tickets to people who were going through the yellow lights, remember?
Right.
And
Yeah.
what did you get? You got people rear-ended all over the places. Crazy people slammed on their brakes to stop from getting into the intersection. But here, I think this is exactly the right thing. And they started it with 10 intersections, and they're moving up to another 15. So
I love
apparently it's working.
I love
Apparently
it.
it's
That's
working.
beautiful.
Which, of course, brings us to the foolishness of the week. And I'm going to speak for all of us by saying we're all watching probably a little too much television.
So football is the foolishness?
Just shut up. What's wrong with you? Football is never the foolishness. God almighty.
Now you've forgotten what it was, haven't you?
No, I'm actually imagining beating you senseless right now. And that actually makes me a little happier than usual. But I want to get back to this idea of all of us watching a little too much TV. And what the hell else are you going to do, right? It's the COVID times when we're all locked in the house. There really isn't a lot by way of entertainment that we can enjoy. So we've all been watching TV at a very accelerated rate. So much so that I think this has happened to me. I bet it's happened to you as well. I turn on the subscription services I have, and I can't locate something I haven't seen.
Right. Yep.
I'm on Amazon, I'm on Hulu, I'm on Netflix. Nothing straight across. And as that phenomenon started to unfold, the silly people in my house, and by that I mean my two daughters, started watching this wretched show called The Tiger King. Did you happen to see this?
Haven't heard of it.
It was part of the cultural zeitgeist, so of course you've not heard of it. But it's probably, for my money, one of the all-time worst things ever to be shown on TV. Cue the hate mail. All the people are going to send hate mail now. But Joe Exotic, the Tiger King, was world-class foolishness.
Yes, I saw 1 or 2 episodes of him, yes.
It was beyond stupid. It was beyond stupid. And what happens to TV shows that are beyond stupid? They get optioned for movies. So now we're going to be treated to the spectacle of Nicolas Cage starring as Joe Exotic, the Tiger King. It's like a cauldron into which you put all the worst of everything, and a bone-chillingly awful movie comes on out.
Well, it's the beauty of a market system. The market gives people what they want. You and I don't tend to like this particular solution, but the beautiful thing is we don't have to pay for it.
Careful now. The market often gives us what we want, but it often gives us what somebody else thinks we want. And those people often lose money on their endeavors. And I'm pretty sure this one's not going to work out, but have at it. These are free people. You can go do whatever stupid thing you want.
While you're talking about Netflix, I ran across a movie today that I had watched some time ago and forgot about. It's on Netflix called Time Trap. It's one of these low-budget films, no-name actors in it, but it's really well done, good storyline, good acting.
That was the Los Angeles thing, right?
No, this is some archaeologist goes into a cave and time goes more slowly in the cave and he emerges. It's the future.
Well, when you watch this and you hate this, blame Anthony.
It's really good.
At the risk of having you talk even more than you already have, we've got something we want to mention here. So why don't you tell the nice people what we would like to talk about?
We do. To help support our podcast making habit, please make your way over to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers, where for less than a Netflix subscription, you can help to ensure a steady stream of thoughtful weekly commentary on economics, government, and current events. Give us what you think we're worth? No. Give us what you think I'm worth, and you can have James as a bonus.
Here we go.
And again, you could donate at patreon.com/wordsandnumbers.
Because I know you had so much fun bleeping me last week. You go f*** yourself. You go f*** yourself.
This week, Roger Ver joins us to discuss cryptocurrency. Roger is founder of Bitcoin.com and Blockchain.com, the world's most popular Bitcoin and Ethereum wallet. Former CEO of BitcoinStore.com, the first website in the world to accept payment in Bitcoin for consumer electronics. Former CEO of Agilestar, a producer of fiber optic transceivers. And former CEO of Memory Dealers, a secondary market for technology components. Between these and other ventures, Roger nearly single-handedly funded the entire first generation of Bitcoin and blockchain businesses. Roger, welcome to Words and Numbers.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much for speaking the voice of liberty to the world. I'm glad to help in any way I can.
It's our absolute pleasure to do that, trust me.
We talk a lot amongst ourselves, and we have a number of fans who talk about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. And every time it comes up, I say the same sort of thing, that cryptocurrency, I believe, is the wave of the future. This is where currencies are going to be. My guess is long term we'll see sovereign currencies running alongside crypto. But crypto offers an opportunity to get out from under this house of cards that our federal government is producing as it prints more and more dollars. My lead-in question for you, and this is a thing that really bothers me about crypto, what's the impediment? Why aren't people adopting and using cryptocurrency much more than what they appear to be?
That's opened a whole can of worms there. So in order for anybody to use anything, it has to be more convenient or more useful or improve their lives in some way over whatever it is that they're using at the moment. And so if someone's drinking Coca-Cola every day because that's what they're used to and that's what they like, they're not going to switch to Pepsi if it's just a tiny bit better. It has to be a lot better or a lot cheaper or a lot more convenient. And the same is true of cryptocurrencies. And so initially, Bitcoin came along and it was a lot more convenient and a lot better. And it did all sorts of things that your Visa card or your PayPal account or your bank account couldn't do. And then today, that version of Bitcoin is now less useful for payments than it used to be. And now there's also a whole bunch of other cryptocurrencies. There's several thousand at this point. And so there's an opportunity cost. Do I spend all afternoon studying a bunch of different cryptocurrencies and figuring out what I need to use? Or am I just going to keep using my Bank of America ATM card because that's what I'm used to and I don't have to spend any time learning something new? And that's time that I can spend doing something else instead. And so I think the adoption has kind of slowed down because of that. And not to go too deep into the history of Bitcoin here, but there was a civil war within Bitcoin. There used to just be one single version of Bitcoin. And one group of people within that version of Bitcoin wanted Bitcoin to scale to be money for the entire world, right there on chain and not have any delay for that to happen. And another group of people thought that Bitcoin could just be used as a store of value and it doesn't have to be useful as a medium of exchange. And as more and more people around the world started to use Bitcoin, the network became more congested. And as the network became more congested, it became less useful for payments. And it became less useful to use as a medium of exchange or to buy or sell things on the internet. And so people, when it became less useful for that, less people started using it for that. And then now it opened the door to several thousand of other cryptocurrencies there. But people wonder, do I use Bitcoin? Do I use Bitcoin Cash? Do I use Ethereum? Do I use Monero? Your head will explode if you spend all day studying it because there's so much going on out there. And so I think that the usage of cryptocurrency around the world was delayed in large part because of that scaling civil war that took place within Bitcoin. And that's disappointing from someone that's opposed to this. I want to see the separation of state and money. The thing that made me so excited about Bitcoin is I felt like it was kryptonite to the state. And finally, we have a chance to finally have a separation of state and money. And in the 10 years that have gone by since I got involved in Bitcoin, PayPal's come a long way. Bank of America's come a long way. Chase has come a long way. And now all their tools and online banking stuff is a lot more convenient than it used to be. And so the gap between what Bank of America can offer me in terms of online payments or PayPal, the gap between that and what cryptocurrencies can offer me today is much, much smaller than it used to be. So 10 years ago, the gap between online banking and Bitcoin was huge. So anybody would instantly just want to start using Bitcoin right away. Whereas now, because that gap is much smaller, it's not a hurdle that's as interesting or exciting to as many people to jump across because it's not that big of an upgrade. It's just a small upgrade compared to what it used to be. And that's a bit disappointing for me. But let's build even better tools to make it even more useful and more exciting for people to make that jump away from the dollar into cryptocurrencies.
The big plus in my mind is something that the sovereign currencies PayPal will never have over Bitcoin, which is that Bitcoin doesn't inflate. So long as the federal government can inflate the dollar, we lose value. It doesn't matter that PayPal is convenient. It's a tool for moving this good that's ever declining in value.
That's right. But now that there's several thousand different cryptocurrencies, and if you consider them all to be equally scarce, right? So all the Bitcoin-derived ones have 21 million coins and ever more. I think the ones that are useful as both a medium of exchange and a store of value will wind up being used as a store of value. If you just have one that you can't use it as a medium of exchange, why are you going to use that to store your value? So I think those are two sides of the same coin. The only reason you store dollars is so that you can spend them later.
When I talk to young people, especially, and inevitably they ask a question about Bitcoin or crypto, the answer that I've been prone to giving them for the last few years is, okay, look, think of yourself as being alive when television was invented. It's a radical new thing that you know in your heart will change everything about human life. But what about the programming? Where's that going to come from? And there's CBS, but there's also the DuPont network. Everybody has heard of CBS. Nobody talks about the DuPont anymore because it didn't actually fit the bill. It didn't give people what they wanted. And it seems to me that we're in a place very similar to that with cryptocurrency. I know in my heart, cryptocurrency will continue to be a thing people want and that they will use. Which one, on the other hand, now I'm confused. Can you offer any analysis of that question?
I think people are going to wind up using the ones that are the most useful. And one of the things that makes something useful, especially when it comes to money, is the network effect. The more people that are using that form of money, the more useful it becomes. The three leaders at the moment are Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Bitcoin Cash in that order. And all three of them are accepted at more than 100,000 websites around the world and are used by people all over the world. But only one of those three has fast, cheap, reliable transactions. Both Bitcoin and then Ethereum have kind of been victims of their own success. So many people are using them that their networks congested, so the fees became high and the transactions became slow, expensive, and unreliable. Ethereum did that because the network is actually full. Bitcoin did that because they chose to put an artificial limit into the amount of block space that the miners are allowed to produce on Bitcoin, whereas the Bitcoin Cash network can handle several times more transactions than all of Bitcoin and all of Ethereum every single day. And so I think there's a real big opportunity there for that. But at the end of the day, people are going to use what's the most useful to them. And if Paris Hilton recommends something, everybody goes and use Paris Hilton's recommendation because they want to feel like they're part of the cool kids club. To a large degree, I think we're seeing that with Bitcoin at this point. People feel like it's the cool kids club, and they're using that, never mind the fact that it's not nearly as actually objectively useful in commerce as some of these other competitors out there.
Can you give us a thumbnail sketch of how much it costs to use each of the big three?
Yeah, so right now, on top of Bitcoin, as we're recording this, is somewhere in the ballpark of $3 to $6 per transaction. Ethereum is in the same ballpark of between $3 to $6. Bitcoin Cash is about a 20th of a penny. And it's important to remember that at the end of 2017, the Bitcoin network, the average fees on the network got to be over $50 for a single transaction. And the average confirmation time, that means the average amount of time it would take for your transaction to go through, became longer than 2 weeks. So you'd have to pay $50 and wait 2 weeks on average for your transaction to go through on the network. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the software developers that are in charge of guiding the protocol development of Bitcoin were cheering and saying, hooray, this is a huge success. Transactions take 2 weeks, whereas they used to take 10 minutes. And now they cost $50 on average, whereas they used to cost less than a penny. And they were cheering about that and so excited about that. And that's what I think the vast majority of the public doesn't realize, is that the software engineers behind the Bitcoin network at this point want the transactions to be slow, expensive, and unreliable. And they don't quite market it that way. But if you look at exactly what they're saying, which is calling for the blocks to always be full, well, the direct result of the blocks always being full means the transactions will be expensive, slow, and unreliable. When I say blocks will be full, what that means is that the network is operating at 100% capacity. There's not any additional room for more people to use it. So everybody has to bid against each other in a market with an artificial supply restraint. They're bidding against each other for room in those blocks to make their Bitcoin transactions. The Bitcoin Cash network is right there, accepted at more physical locations than Bitcoin and just as many websites around the world as Bitcoin. And it just doesn't have the cool kids popularity yet. But I think eventually things will balance out there.
Why is it that the software engineers are looking to build software that's expensive to use and takes a long time?
In 120 years from now, the Bitcoin block reward will run out. And what that means is that every 10 minutes, there's a new block added to the blockchain. And within that block are all the transactions that happen on the network. And every time that block is produced, the miners get some new Bitcoin. In 120 years from now, that block reward will run out and the miners won't get anything. So what they're thinking is that they need to have high fees on the network in order to pay the miners 120 years in the future. And from my point of view is that you've created a giant problem today to try to avoid something that might possibly be a problem 120 years in the future. And I think that was an absolute disaster. We had businesses like Microsoft and Dell Computer and Tiger Direct, all these businesses literally stopped accepting Bitcoin at the end of 2017 or beginning of 2018 when the blocks became full. So literally, Microsoft stopped accepting Bitcoin. Expedia stopped accepting Bitcoin. As any sort of entrepreneur would see, that's an absolute disaster for your product being rolled out to the market around the world. And from my point of view, Bitcoin was so exciting because it was kryptonite to the state. So we need to roll it out. Every person in the entire world is using it as quickly as possible before the state has a chance to realize, oh, wait a minute, we've had a monopoly on the issuance of money for decades and decades here. We're about to lose that. We better do something about that. And if I can put on my conspiracy theory hat, maybe they did do something about that. So it's not even a secret, but somebody working openly for an intelligence agency paid to put out the very first small block supporting propaganda on the Bitcoin network, trying to trick people into thinking that by keeping the blocks small, Bitcoin would remain more decentralized and beyond government control. And the reality is it did the exact opposite. If you get everybody using Bitcoin, it'll be too late for government to control it. But by limiting the block size and limiting the number of people around the world that can use Bitcoin, it makes it much easier for governments to control it and pass laws about it and restrict people from being able to use it.
Beyond that, there seems to be an unintended consequence as well. If you're looking at very high fees, the entire developing or third world is eliminated as a customer. They literally can't afford the high overage on the transaction, even if they can afford a very small transaction.
I get emails actually pretty often from people in places like Venezuela or different parts of Africa saying, thank you so much for speaking out for fast, cheap, reliable transactions on Bitcoin Cash, because they say they can't afford to make a Bitcoin transaction. $3 for a fee, that's a really meaningful amount of money for lots of people in lots of places in the world. And maybe if you're some tech entrepreneur in San Francisco, you don't care about it because you're spending $10 on your Starbucks coffee. But if you're somebody living in Venezuela or living in some other place in the world here, $3 is a lot of money, and you won't be able to use the Bitcoin network, and you'll be stuck using your local currency. And we see governments trying to protect that. I went to a zoo not too long ago in Indonesia, of all places, and at the ticket counter at the zoo, they literally had a sign saying it is illegal to use anything other than the Indonesian rupee to pay for your tickets at the zoo. You know, they didn't say it in quite so many words, but basically they said, if we catch you using something other than the Indonesian rupee, you're going to go to jail. It just shows, governments want to make sure people continue to use their government-issued monopoly money, because the moment people start using something else, they lose control of their ability to control people and control the economy and control the flow of goods, and they lose their ability to prevent people from being able to make the world a better place by trading with each other. And that's the beautiful part about cryptocurrencies, is that it allows anybody, anywhere on the planet, to engage and trade with anybody else anywhere on the planet. And there's nothing that anybody can do to stop it, unless the fees are too high, at which point people can no longer afford to do those things. And that's exactly what happened to Bitcoin.
I've been interested in Bitcoin for 5 years or more, got involved in it back when it was around $200, which was an exciting thing. And as much as I feel comfortable with cryptocurrency, there's one thing that stands out in my mind that bothers me, and that's advances in quantum computing. Am I correct in assuming that once we lock down quantum computing correctly, that cryptocurrency is going to have a serious problem because the encryption can be easily broken?
Yes and no, but mainly no. Some changes will need to be made once we have quantum computers with enough qubits. But the main thing that Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash users will have to do is you'll never, ever be able to reuse the same address more than once. So anytime you receive a payment, you'll need to use all of those funds and move them to a new address on the blockchain. And so as long as you're not reusing the same address more than once, you'll be okay. And then they can make other adjustments as well out there. And there's other much more technical people out there than myself that can speak to the exact details there. But from just the average Joe end user, the wallet software will update in such a way in which it won't be reusing addresses ever, and your coins will still be fine and continue to be useful.
So as people heard in your bio earlier on, You were the founder of Bitcoin.com. So why don't you tell us what that's all about and how you actually got that address? That's a real coup.
Yeah, so Satoshi Nakamoto called me up and said, Roger, just kidding. I bought it for a lot of Bitcoins in 2014 is the real story there. When I heard about Bitcoin for the first time in 2011, I felt like, oh, the thing I've been waiting for my entire life finally arrived, because we already had the internet, but we didn't have money for the internet. I had read about it in different science fiction books and was so excited by reading books like Cryptonomicon by Neil Stephenson, and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress was a really fun one by Robert Heinlein. And I kind of felt like we were seeing these things come together, whereas we had read about cyberspace and people having their own communities there. But now suddenly we had money where people in cyberspace could suddenly be in their own world and they didn't have to depend on government issued money. And they could really build a real cyberspace that was beyond the traditional world. And it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me in my entire life at that point. And I literally stayed up all day, every day, and only slept for about an hour a night for over a week. And I got so sick, I literally had to be taken to the hospital from lack of sleep, from being so excited about Bitcoin when I first heard about it. I spent every waking moment for almost 10 years now promoting the adoption of cryptocurrencies around the world, investing in different startups and telling people about it, because this is one of the best tools the world has ever had to bring about more individual economic freedom, to where now finally anybody can engage in commerce with anybody else anywhere in the world, and there's nothing that anybody can do to stop it. You know, anybody who studies economics realizes that anytime anybody trades anything with anybody, both people are better off after the trade takes place. Otherwise, the trade wouldn't happen. And so anytime governments are hindering people from being able to trade with each other, they're hindering people from being able to make each other better off. And now suddenly we have a tool where everybody can trade with everybody, which will make everybody better off. And the government can't stop it. So that's a fantastic thing for everybody, except for the people in government that want to, violently interject themselves into the peaceful trade of other people. And that's why I love cryptocurrencies, is because it's kryptonite to the violent interjection of the state into commerce. What could be more exciting and more fulfilling than to be involved in something like that?
I was both surprised and disturbed. It was several months ago. One of the major politicians, I want to say Nancy Pelosi, but don't quote me on that, said something about the federal government starting its own cryptocurrency. And I've been saying for a long time that the way the federal debt plays out is that the government at some point is going to issue a new dollar. The purpose being to hide the massive inflation that's necessary to fund the current debt levels. And I saw this as an opportunity to do that, introduce the new dollar. But it disturbed me because if you take an idea as wonderful as cryptocurrency and you put it into the hands of the government, what you end up with is probably something akin to taking something wonderful like FedEx and turning it into the U.S. Postal Service. Do you think it's realistic that the government would attempt to come out with its own cryptocurrency? And if so, what kind of effect would that have on the rest of the market? My assumption is that the government would simultaneously come out with a law saying that private cryptocurrency is illegal.
I think there's two ways that this can play out. So one is which cryptocurrency is wonderful for everybody, and we can all say, kumbaya into the world of free trade ever after. The other is 1984 dystopian nightmare in which the government issues a cryptocurrency and it can track every single person's transaction for everything. And if you're doing anything they don't like at all, they can know exactly who did it and come after you directly. I'm very, very optimistic that the first scenario is going to be the one that takes place, because with the invention of these decentralized platforms, government issued currencies still have to compete in the market against these free market issued currencies. And so if a free market issued currency provides more usefulness to people around the world, people are still going to flock to that, and they can't shut them down. They can't stop them. There's no CEO that they can arrest and toss in jail. There's no server they can unplug. There's no central authority that they can go to complain about what's going on. And so that puts government issued currencies now on almost the same playing field as the free markets issued cryptocurrencies. All they can do is make a law banning people from using non-government issued currencies. But I think people will see through that. They'll say, hey, why shouldn't I be able to use this one? This one works better. It's faster, cheaper, more reliable, and more private, right? What's wrong with financial privacy? When people have the choice, and the fast, cheap, reliable, and private one can't be shut down by governments, when people have that choice, I think they're going to choose the one that serves the demands of the consumers better than the ones that serves the demands of the government agents and politicians. And so I'm real optimistic that it'll the brighter side of those two particular futures.
What happens when the IRS shows up and says that you have to turn over the records you have of people's cryptocurrency exchanges?
Yeah, so there are people already building all sorts of decentralized exchanges. It's a fancy way of saying is that there's nobody running the exchange. There's no CEO that they could serve a subpoena to and say, hey, give us a list of everybody's trades and their KYC documents and passports and proof of address. There isn't anybody for them to go to about that. One of the main reasons the Ethereum network is so congested and has fees so high right now is because people are really busy using those sorts of decentralized trading platforms where people are busy trading all sorts of digital assets. And then you have other really powerful tools like local.bitcoin.com that allows anybody in any country to buy or sell Bitcoin Cash for any payment method in any country with no ID required, no permission, no anything at all, because the platform never touches the money. It never has control of the funds in any way whatsoever. Once you have any one single cryptocurrency, it's easy to trade it into any other cryptocurrency. All bets are off. You can do whatever you want with it from that point. You're home free. And so I think because these powerful tools are out there, it's going to make it really, really hard for governments to continue to spy on what everybody's doing. We already saw a year or two ago, the IRS, I think they went to Coinbase and said, we want everybody's data. And Coinbase pushed back a bit. And
my crypto was at Coinbase. I felt that pain.
Yeah, that's a real important distinction for people to understand is Coinbase isn't a Bitcoin wallet. It's a Bitcoin account, just like your Bank of America account where they're holding the dollars for you. Whereas Bitcoin.com or Blockchain.com or a number of these other ones are actual wallets where the money is literally on your device and you have control of it yourself, just like if you have paper money in your physical wallet in your pocket. And so if you're holding your cryptocurrency in a wallet where you're the one in control, it's much, much harder for governments to go subpoena you yourself for what's in there or some sort of other institution. So I think it's really important for people to keep their cryptocurrency in actual wallets rather than custodial accounts.
So it's a difference between conducting transactions in cash versus conducting transactions in credit card.
Or a check or something. Yeah. That's a great analogy.
Okay.
You said a couple of times here, and I think rightfully so, that it has to be fast, cheap, and reliable. But there's, I think, another leg underneath that tabletop, and it's easy. I can wake up tomorrow morning, go open a Ameritrade account, link it to my bank, have it fully funded within a day or two, and I'll be trading stocks by the weekend. That seems not possible, at least not right this second, with any of the cryptocurrencies. So how do you suspect they're going to become so easy to use that normal people who are not crypto fans by nature would feel comfortable jumping into the water here?
Yeah, that's up to all the entrepreneurs in the space to build those tools to make it so easy that it does feel easier. And the Bitcoin.com wallet's getting pretty darn easy. Literally, the hardest part of the entire process is downloading the app from the App Store. And then once you have the app downloaded from the App Store, you can now send and receive Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash with anyone anywhere in the world. And you can also buy some with a credit card right there from the app, and you can have your first cryptocurrency within, I don't know, maybe it takes 10 minutes to go through the credit card purchasing process. So it's getting there, but it's a constant evolution, all of humankind. The first TVs were really hard to use. Now TVs, you can literally talk to them and they do what you tell them to do just by talking to them. So that's how far TVs have come. And the same will be true of these cryptocurrency wallets. They're getting better and better every year. And before you know it, you probably won't even have to talk to your wallet. You just think at your wallet and the wallet will know what you're thinking and do the commands for you.
That's a little frightening, actually. I can imagine a world in which my wife would think at my wallet and bad things would probably happen there.
You're clearly optimistic about crypto, and I share your optimism, but I get antsy. I'm wondering how long until cryptocurrency becomes kind of a standard thing that people use, like PayPal became a standard thing eventually. Are we talking 10 years, 20 years, 5 years?
Yeah, I think we would have been there today if we hadn't hit that scaling civil war within Bitcoin, where literally some of the biggest companies on earth, companies like Microsoft, stopped using Bitcoin. That's a really, really, really big deal that they literally stopped. And for the first time in the entire history of Bitcoin, we had reverse merchant adoption. We had reverse user adoption. We had reverse price adoption. That was disastrous for the future of Bitcoin. And now there's market confusion because there used to just only be one single Bitcoin. And the slogan of Coinbase literally used to be accept Bitcoin. The motto of Kraken was it was a Bitcoin exchange. All these businesses were Bitcoin businesses. Now they're all cryptocurrency businesses, and people have to decide, well, do I want Bitcoin? Do I want Ethereum? Do I want Bitcoin Cash? Do I want Monero? Do I want Sushi and Yearn and all these other, the latest cryptocurrency of the week stuff that's out there? It causes confusion. And when there's a whole bunch of different choices out there, sometimes the decision they choose to make is to continue using what they've always been using because it's too much work for them to figure out what to switch to. So I think that that's been real disappointing. How many more years into the future? I don't know, but it's farther away than it would have been if Bitcoin had been allowed to scale to become money for the world on chain, as was described on the original Bitcoin.org website. If you go and look at the Internet Archive and look at Bitcoin.org from 2011, 12, 13, even 2014, it described very clearly how Bitcoin could be money for everybody in the entire world just by allowing the blocks to become bigger as more and more people started to use it. Instead, they limited the block size to about 1 megabyte. And I think that in the future, that will look just as silly as the quote from Bill Gates early on saying, who would ever need more than 640 kilobytes of RAM? And now you have computers that have more than 640 gigabytes of RAM you can get now. And it's just incredible the pace of human progress in regards to technology. And I don't think that cryptocurrencies are going to be any exception. So it's up to the entrepreneurs out there to build the tools.
I'm listening to your answer. The thought strikes me, I wonder if the answer to all of this lies in the next generations. Being a college professor, I've had the joy, and it's also perplexed me, to watch generations of students come through. And you'll get a generation of students who glom on to some new technology. And about 5 years later, the next batch that comes through will reject that technology. There's something new that's coming along, and it's almost, you're considered old if you use this old thing. I saw it happen when PayPal came along and then gets replaced by Venmo. Maybe the next thing is then Bitcoin. All we need is a batch of new freshmen coming into college who decide they're going to use Bitcoin.
I think you're right. The new generation that pushes society ahead. And I'm in my 40s now. Sometimes I'm looking at what some of these young people are doing with technology. It makes me feel my age a bit.
Just wait until you're in your 50s. I can guarantee you that it gets much, much worse at that point. Roger, thank you for coming. This has really been quite eye-opening. Maybe we'll have you back on sometime. But for those of you on our Patreon, Roger's going to stick around for a minute or two and talk to us about Bitcoin over there. That's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Be sure to join us next week when I swear at Anthony even more. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter. The handles are in the show notes. You can join our Words and Numbers Backstage Facebook group where the conversation continues.
Keep that email coming, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com. You've all done a wonderful job. You've made James incredibly angry.
And until next week, be nice to each other. I know it gets harder the closer we get to the election. I don't want to be nice to other people either, but it's in our self-interest to all be nice to one another. Let's try this approach. I try moralizing. That doesn't work. Well, okay, self-interest it is. Let's make the Randians happy for a change. Be nice to each other. If everybody did it, we'd all be better off. And I'll catch you next week.
See you next week, James.